All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a brand that honestly practically defines the phrase retro computing. We're talking about Commodore. For anyone who grew up typing lines of code into a C64 or just marveling at the graphics of an Amiga, this name holds absolute legendary status. But recently, Commodore threw a massive curveball that left the tech world completely stunned. They didn't release a new home computer. They didn't drop a retro console. Nope. They released a totally unexpected, out-of-the-ordinary smartphone called the Commodore Callback. And as we're about to see, when a legacy brand makes a left turn this sharp, the ripples it sends through their loyal community are absolutely fascinating to watch. So if you happen to catch their exclusive launch out on YouTube, the vibe was incredibly nostalgic and honestly surprisingly bold. They framed this new device as a literal time machine. Their main pitch? All your favorite apps, privacy first, with no social media, no browser, less scroll, more soul. They are leaning heavily into the whole digital detox movement, promising an escape from our hyper-connected, always-on daily lives, and directing eager fans straight to their website to essentially travel back in time. Okay, let's dive into this and look at our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 5 main areas. First, the return to the past. Second, the community impact. Third, the main criticisms. Fourth, we'll look at digital detox versus nostalgia. And finally, how to save the launch. Starting with Section 1, Return to the Past. Commodore's digital detox move was a seriously bold bet that their audience was finally ready to unplug. Which brings us to Part 2, Community Impact. And wow, this is where we hit the proverbial record scratch. Because the reality of the fans' reactions was completely different from what the brand hoped. What's really interesting about the slide is the sheer scale of the pushback. When analysts looked at nearly 2,000 community comments, they found an overwhelming 75% negative, highly critical sentiment. 3 out of 4 people were unhappy. Only 15% were enthusiastically positive, with the remaining 10% just sitting in a mixed, neutral camp. The core audience of retro computing enthusiasts was, quite frankly, blindsided by this product. Now, to be fair and impartial here, we absolutely need to acknowledge that 15% who cheered for this device. This minority genuinely appreciated the anti-social media stance. They actively supported the digital detox philosophy and the fight against smartphone alienation. Plus, some of these users really praised the aesthetic design, specifically calling out the sleek look of the Starlight Edition. For them, the message of mental wellness and taking a much-needed break from the screen resonated perfectly. Moving to Section 3, Main Criticisms. Let's break down exactly why that massive 75% backlash was so severe. This brutally illustrates the contrast at the heart of the frustration. On the left, you see what the loyalists actually anticipated. Maybe a modern Amiga FPGA, a hardware recreation of those classic chips, a portable C64, or even a modernized C128. Basically, they wanted hardware that honored their roots. But on the right, that's the reality they got, a basic T9 flip phone. Because of this massive gap between expectations and reality, the community lobbed heavy accusations at Commodore. They called it a superficial cash grab and accused them of white labeling, which is basically just slapping their legendary logo onto some cheap, generic hardware. And then there's the elephant in the room, the price point. The Callback launched at around $499, or €500. I want you to really think about that for a second. Would you honestly pay $500,000 for a device whose primary selling point is that it entirely removes your access to modern applications? The community certainly balked at it. Many compared it unfavorably to basic $40 dumb phones, calling that $500 price tag exorbitant and totally unjustifiable. Beyond just the price tag and the philosophy, users immediately pointed out some severe, everyday functional obstacles. A digital detox sounds amazing in theory, right? Until you realize the actual friction it creates in the real world. For starters, the return to the old ABCDEF T9 keyboard actually scared off older users or folks with joint problems. On top of that, the complete lack of a modern app ecosystem means no banking authenticators and no local transport maps. It essentially forces users to give up tools that aren't just distractions but are fundamental, practical requirements for daily modern life. Section 4, Digital Detox versus Nostalgia. This is where we see a fascinating psychological disconnect. See, Commodore is trying to sell a minimalistic digital detox to an audience that is entirely powered by deep technical nostalgia. I absolutely love this quote pulled directly from the community analysis because it perfectly captures the historical irony here. One user simply pointed out, nobody had a cell phone when they used the C64. It's hilarious, it's empathetic, and it's painfully true. It highlights exactly why the target audience felt so profoundly confused. The crucial point here is what analysts are calling the April Fool's syndrome. A significant portion of the comments admitted they literally checked their calendars to see if it was April 1st. Commodore tapped into the nostalgia of hackers, tinkerers, and retro gamers, but then turned around and offered them a closed-off, unhackable, non-gaming device. The brand's credibility took a massive hit simply because the product and the audience's core identity were completely out of alignment. Finally, Section 5, How to Save the Launch. Let's pivot and look at some constructive strategic recommendations. The analysis lays out 4 urgent, actionable steps to bridge this gap. First, communication transparency. Second, pricing revision. Third, a feature pivot. And fourth, roadmap reassurance. Regarding that price, they urgently need to lower the barrier to entry. At $500, they are blocking the very users who actually want a digital detox. They need special promotions or bundle strategies right away to soften that blow. Next, they desperately need a massive shift in how they promote this device. Right now, the marketing focuses entirely on what the phone doesn't do. No browsers, no socials. But the recommended strategy? Highlight what it can do. They need to shout from the rooftops that it supports APK sideloading to install your own apps, acts as a Wi-Fi hotspot, and incredibly can actually run native Linux and execute C64 emulators through the Commodore store. True Commodore fans are tinkerers by nature. If you show them a device they can actually experiment with and hack on, you instantly change the conversation. Lastly, Commodore must prove that their core retro computing identity is still fully intact. They have to transparently reassure their community that the Callback is just an experimental side project. They really need to communicate that the cash flow from this phone is actively funding future core hardware, like the actual retro consoles and computers that the fans are begging for. Which leaves us with the ultimate question as we wrap up this explainer. They have the roadmap to fix their messaging, but the trust of a legacy community is incredibly fragile. So, will Commodore's next chapter be a game over, or will they successfully pivot their strategy and register a brand new high score? It is a super high-stakes test of brand loyalty, and I highly encourage you to keep your eyes on how they play their next life. Thanks for joining me, and keep thinking about what you'd do in their shoes.